No one in Maple Grove was prepared to see a 10-year-old girl tremble like that just hearing a teacher's name. Emily would come home from theater rehearsals with her hands so cold they looked like someone else's, her eyes empty, distant, repeating that all that fear was just part of the paper. Her mother, Karen, saw her daughter waking up at night, sweating, with lines from the play stuck in her throat, and felt a despair that did not match a simple school activity. It all seemed strange, but the most shocking thing happened one Thursday afternoon, when Karen sneaked into the school auditorium, crowded with excited children, and what she saw behind the stage made her heart almost stop, as if a hidden truth had decided to show itself in a brutal and unbelievable way. But to understand how that mother got to the point of invading an auditorium and challenging a beloved teacher throughout the city, you have to go back a few weeks and look at the calm life she led before any suspicion. Karen Miller was 42 years old and worked as a nurse at a community hospital outside Maple Grove, a quiet suburb near Chicago, with tree-lined streets, houses with manicured gardens, and neighbors who greeted each other as they picked up the newspaper at the door. She was one of those mothers who knew the names of all the teachers, who made medical appointments on time, who kept drawings of their daughter in a shoebox as if they were rare treasures. Karen's routine revolved around shifts at the hospital, trips to the market, simple dinners at home, and, above all, the care of Emily, her only daughter, her most precious possession. Emily was 10 years old and had a sweet manner that caught the attention of anyone who met her for 5 minutes. She was shy with strangers, but at home she filled the kitchen with drawings, scribbling notebooks with backdrops of castles, forests, and stages full of lights. I watched videos of children's plays on television, imitated lines, created small stories with dolls, and always spoke of a simple dream. One day I want to go on a real stage with people watching. To Karen, it sounded like a beautiful, innocent wish, something that matched the safe city where they lived, and Lincoln Elementary School, the public school that served children from all over the neighborhood and that everyone spoke highly of. It was precisely there, at Lincoln Elementary, that the theater teacher appeared in their lives. Mr. Daniel Harris was in his early 40s, with brown hair beginning to turn gray, and an easy smile that pleased parents and students. He wore simple clothes, usually a blazer over a cotton shirt, and was always wearing some accessory linked to the theater, such as a colorful scarf or a badge with masks of comedy and tragedy. The school administration presented him as a dedicated man, someone who believed that art could help children face their fears, speak in public, and get to know each other better. In the first meetings, his parents were impressed by the calm way he explained every detail of the projects. Karen, sitting in one of the rows of folding chairs in the gymnasium, listened to Mr. Harris talk about the winter play and felt enormous pride when she saw Emily, her eyes shining, raising her hand to sign up for the theater group. The first parent meeting was like in any typical American school. In the gymnasium, the wooden floor glowed under the white lights, the court lines highlighted, and there was a table with coffee in thermoses, donuts and cupcakes brought by volunteer mothers. Karen held a cup of warm coffee as she watched Emily run with other children through the space, laughing and talking non-stop about the play. Mr. Harris climbed onto a small improvised stage, took the microphone, and began to explain the theatrical project of that year. He spoke of how the play would work with emotions, spoke of getting the best out of children, helping them face their own fear, and using the stage as a safe place to explore feelings. The other mothers nodded their heads smiling, some even applauded. Karen felt a deep peace. She thought that in that school, with that teacher so safe, Emily would not only be learning to act, but growing as a person. A few days later, the news came that Emily had been waiting for. She had been chosen for a role in the winter play. It wasn't the main role, but it had lines, movements, presence on stage. The morning she received the paper, Karen's house was filled with simple joy. They woke up early. The smell of coffee and pancakes with maple syrup took over the kitchen. The radio played soft music as Karen turned the pancakes in the pan, and Emily, already in uniform, sitting at the table, couldn't stop talking. She told about the script, about the friends who would also join the cast, about how the auditorium stage was bigger than she imagined when she saw it only from the chairs. He spoke quickly, without breathing properly, as if he wanted to embrace the whole world at once. Karen watched her daughter and thought how beautiful it was to see a shy girl finding herself in an activity that made her shine. That day, the yellow bus stopped in front of the sidewalk as it always did. Other children waited with colourful backpacks on their backs, and some mothers waved from afar. Karen straightened Emily's coat, zipped it tighter, ran her hand through her daughter's hair to remove an unruly strand from her face, and gave her a kiss on the forehead. Emily came down the steps of the balcony, almost jumping, turned at the last second, and shouted that after class she would have her first real rehearsal with Mr. Harris. The mother waved, her heart full of pride, and stood on the sidewalk until the bus turned the corner. It was a common scene, repeated so many times in so many American cities, that no one would have imagined that there, in that simple gesture, a story full of fear and discovery began. The first trials seemed, at first glance, normal. Emily came back telling of warm-up exercises, of impromptu games, of how Mr. Harris asked them to feign joy, sadness, surprise. He said that he was funny, that he made jokes, that sometimes he sat on the edge of the stage to listen to the children talk about the day. Karen listened to everything as she prepared dinner, chopping vegetables on the board, stirring pots, and felt satisfaction. I mentally wrote down the rehearsal times, checked the dates that the school sent on notes, glued everything with magnets on the refrigerator door. For her, it was a relief to know that her daughter had found something she loved. It was in one of these light conversations that the first mention of the so-called special rehearsal only with the backstage group came up. Emily spoke of it half laughing, half embarrassed, as she combed her hair in the bathroom mirror. He said that, in addition to the normal scenes on stage, Mr. Harris chose some students to rehearse deeper things behind the curtain, in a space that could not be seen from the audience. He said that it was a fear training, that he said that only those who participated in this group would understand the true spirit of the play. Karen heard this in passing, her mind torn between preparing the next day's lunchbox and putting away the dry clothes. At that moment, it didn't give much weight. He thought that maybe it was just a different name for a more detailed essay, a way for the teacher to motivate the children. Days later, there was a quick meeting with some parents, organized by the school to talk about the progress of the play. It was there that Karen had her first direct impression of Mr. Harris in a closer environment. He approached a small circle of mothers and fathers, holding a folder of papers and smiling as if among old friends. She spoke calmly, saying that the class was doing very well, that the level of commitment of the children was exciting, that Emily had a special sparkle in her eyes when she said her lines. Karen felt her chest fill with pride when she heard this. She asked lightly what those special rehearsals that her daughter mentioned were. Harris laughed, adjusted his blazer, and explained that these were moments of more intense work with a smaller group to help the children really get into the emotion of the scene, especially in the parts where they would have to represent fear or sadness. The other mothers present there reacted naturally. One of them commented that she thought it was great to see a teacher so involved with the work. Another said that her daughter kept telling how the shoot was cool and different. Karen, surrounded by smiles and positive comments, felt almost silly for asking a question that suddenly seemed exaggerated. Maybe I'm really seeing things where there isn't any, he thought for a moment. But inside her, a small voice would not be silent. It was a light sensation, almost invisible, like a thread pulling from inside the chest. A premonition that she still couldn't explain. The first rehearsal Karen picked up Emily from later than usual marked an important moment. The late afternoon sky at Maple Grove was orange to pink. The trees cast long shadows over the school parking lot, and the cold wind made dry leaves dance across the ground. Karen parked the car and waited a few minutes, watching the side door of the auditorium from afar. Children left little by little, some in groups, others alone, carrying backpacks and costumes in plastic bags. Emily took a little longer. When he finally appeared, he was standing beside Mr. Harris, holding a crumpled paper with lines on it, and he was smiling strangely, a smile that did not reach his eyes. When she got into the car, Karen asked lightly how the shoot had been. Emily replied that it had been tiring, but important. He spoke again of the backstage group and said that the teacher had chosen only 3 children to train the fear scene separately. That was said quickly between one sigh and another, while the girl was moving her seatbelt. The mother felt a slight discomfort, but still muffled her restlessness with practical thoughts. It was just theater, she said to herself. But Emily's body said something else. One night, after one of these rehearsals, a scene happened that would never leave Karen's mind. It was cold outside, and inside the house, the heater made a constant, calm noise. Her mother was folding Emily's uniform over the bed, adjusting the fabric for the next day, when she heard her daughter moving restlessly in the next room. He approached slowly, put his hand on the handle, and opened the door carefully. Emily, who was supposed to be asleep, tossed and cradled under the blanket, sweating, her face wet, her breathing quick. She murmured passages from the play, words that spoke of fear, of darkness, of being alone with no one to help. Her hands squeezed the sheet tightly, as if trying to hold on to something they couldn't see. Karen walked over and touched her daughter's arm. Emily woke up startled, her eyes wide, taking a few seconds to understand where she was. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, ran her hand through her damp hair, and asked in a low voice if she was okay, if she had had a nightmare. The girl took a deep breath, looked to the side, avoiding her mother's face, and replied that it was just the play, which the teacher said that if they dreamed about the scenes, it was a sign that they were taking it seriously. Ice rose up Karen's spine when she heard this. Since when does a 10-year-old child need to dream with fear to act? He thought. The feeling of something wrong began to take shape within her. Despite the tightness in her chest, Karen tried to calm down. She was very careful with everything related to her daughter, and many times people had already said that she was too worried. He lay next to Emily for a few minutes, waiting for the girl's heart to slow down, and then returned to his own room, taking with him a series of unanswered questions. She spent long minutes staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a train passing in the distance, common in the region, and fighting with herself. Maybe it's just staged nervousness, he repeated in silence. Maybe I'm really exaggerating. But the more he tried to convince himself of this, the more his chest weighed. The days passed, and the routine of rehearsals began to change the life of the house. Twice a week, Emily stayed late at school because of preparations for the play. The sun set earlier at that time of year, and by the time Karen arrived at the parking lot, the sky was already tinged with orange and purple, with the first stars appearing timidly. SUVs and minivans filled the space in front of Lincoln Elementary, headlights on, some parents fiddling with their phones while waiting, others chatting in small groups. Karen watched the door of the auditorium with her fingers squeezing the steering wheel, feeling the cold wind sway the dry branches of the surrounding trees. It was during the 3rd week of rehearsals that a disturbing pattern began to become impossible to ignore. Every time Karen mentioned the name Mr. Harris at home, Emily's voice would shrink, almost gone, and her shoulders would shrug as if they wanted to hide inside her own body. If someone asked at a Sunday dinner how the rehearsals were going, Emily would answer in short sentences, saying that everything was fine, but her gaze would escape to any corner of the room that was not her mother's face. Karen noticed that whenever the subject was the teacher, the girl moved her fingers, bit her nail, squeezed her napkin. These were small details, but that, added together, began to form an unsettling image. One night, after one of those days of extended rehearsal, Karen was folding her school uniform again in the laundry room, smelling soap and fabric softener in the air, when she heard a dry noise coming from her daughter's room. He ran there and found Emily sitting on the bed, panting, with her face red and her hair sticking to her forehead. The girl said that she had felt enormous fear in the dream, that she was on a dark stage, with lights almost off, while a voice told her to repeat the same panicked speech again and again, without stopping. Karen hugged her daughter and tried to calm her down, but inside, the feeling that it had crossed the line grew like a shadow. The next day, he decided to watch Emily more closely. She noticed that, close to the time to go to rehearsals, her daughter began to complain of a stomach pain. At first, it was a mild discomfort. Then he started to say that he felt nauseous, that his hands were sweating, that he wanted to stay at home. However, whenever Karen suggested that she not go, Emily reacted with despair, saying that there was no way she could be missing, that the teacher said that if someone in the special group failed, he could ruin the whole play. These words did not leave her mother's head all day. Even so, for a few moments, she still insisted on calming herself with logical explanations. Maybe it's just anxiety, he thought as he poured water to boil on the stove. Maybe I'm trying to protect too much, and it's getting in the way of her freedom. It was a difficult conflict. On the one hand, the instinct that screamed. On the other, the fear of being unfair, of creating confusion at school, of being seen as the exaggerated mother who sees danger in everything. However, as the days passed, the signs became too strong to be dismissed as simple nervousness. On a freezing evening, Karen decided to do something different. Instead of arriving at school exactly at the time the rehearsal ended, he left home a few minutes early and parked the car in front of Lincoln Elementary with time to spare. He stood there with the engine off, the window slightly fogged by the heat inside, watching the movement. He saw children leaving the normal classrooms, heard laughter echoing through the courtyard, noticed employees crossing the corridor with stacks of books. But the auditorium, the one where the rehearsals took place, continued with the door closed and the lights inside on, projecting a yellowish glow through the cracks. She then noticed the moment when Mr. Harris appeared at the entrance of the auditorium. He talked to the children, pointed to the stage, made gestures with his hands. Then he called a smaller group of only 3 girls, including Emily, and led them into the auditorium, partially closing the door. The other children stood outside, talking, as if that special group was part of a silent agreement that no one questioned. From inside the car, Karen clearly saw when Emily pressed her coat to her chest, as if trying to protect herself from the cold or something that makes her feel afraid, even inside a closed and heated place. An impulse almost made her run out of the car to enter the auditorium at that moment. He felt his heart beating fast, his hands sweating, his thoughts running over. "I need to see what's going on inside," he repeated mentally. The moment he held the handle from the inside, ready to open the car door, someone knocked on the driver's side window. It was another mother, known from the city, smiling, with a coffee in her hand, asking how Karen was doing, and making some trivial comment about the cold weather that week. That interruption, at once simple and profound, broke Karen's impulse like a bucket of cold water. She rolled down the window, answered the questions, smiled politely, tried to pretend normality, while inside her chest burned with frustration. Every second of conversation made it seem that the chance of catching something strange was getting more distant. When the other mother left, the moment had passed. The group of girls was no longer behind the door, and Mr. Harris appeared again at the front of the auditorium, bidding farewell to the children who were leaving. Emily, seeing her mother in the car, ran with a suppressed smile, but her eyes still bore a shadow that Karen couldn't name. That night, in the kitchen illuminated by the yellowish light on the table, Karen decided that she could no longer just watch from afar. As he put dinner on, he calmly asked how the rehearsals of that day had been. Emily stirred the food without much desire, pushing the rice from one side of the plate to the other. After a heavy silence, he replied that Mr. Harris was doing a special training with the group, so that they would really feel the fear and thus be able to act better. She said that he turned off almost all the lights, made the three girls stand in a corner behind the curtain and asked them to close their eyes and imagine being alone in a dark place, with no one around. Karen felt a lump in her throat. Since when does a child need to be really afraid to act? He thought, with a tightness in his chest. The noise of the refrigerator seemed enormous in the silence of that kitchen. The sound of the spoon hitting the plate echoed as a reminder that there was something there that didn't match an innocent school activity. Emily avoided her mother's gaze, pretended to pay attention to a small stain on the tablecloth, and it hurt even more. The entire house, which had always been a place of peace, now seemed a scene of quiet tension. At the same time, Karen found herself caught between two opposing forces. On the one hand, the real fear that something was exceeding the limit of what is acceptable, messing with her daughter's head in a dangerous way. On the other, the fear of being unfair to a teacher that the whole city respected, a man that the school trusted, that other mothers praised. "Am I going crazy?" she asked herself, lying in bed that night, unable to sleep. Every memory of Emily's dreams, of her cold hands, of her voice diminishing as she spoke of the teacher, came back like a movie, scene after scene, and the more she remembered, the harder it was to ignore. This led her to seek, the following weekend, the opinion of other mothers. On Saturday morning, the soccer field behind the school was filled with children running after the ball, parents sitting in folding chairs, some with blankets over their legs because of the cold wind. Karen sat next to two neighbors, women she had known for years, and between one comment and another about the game, she blurted out a remark about the theater rehearsals. He spoke of the extended hours, of the special group that stayed longer, of the scenes of fear that Mr. Harris insisted on repeating. The two mothers reacted with light laughter, without malice but full of a confidence that hurt. They said that the teacher was amazing, that the children loved his classes, that he had improved the shyness of many students. One of them commented that her daughter came home happy, saying that she felt special to participate in the reserved group. The other added that she thought it was beautiful to see a man so dedicated to an artistic project in a public school, something rare these days. Karen smiled on the outside, nodded, tried to follow the conversation. Inside, however, a sense of loneliness took over. As the referee blew the whistle for the end of the game and the parents cheered the children, Karen felt as if she were in a different place, separated from the rest of the world by an invisible glass. "If I'm right, no one will support me," she thought. "If I'm wrong, I'll look crazy." These phrases swirled in her head like an insistent echo. On the way home, driving through the quiet streets of Maple Grove, with the houses lined up and the flags of the United States waving in the wind, Karen was sure of only one thing. Something inside her would no longer be silent. She still didn't know how or when, but she felt that she would have to go all the way to find out what, after all, was hidden behind that stage curtain where her daughter trembled so much. If you've come this far, it's because a real story interests you, and maybe it's stirring your memories and feelings too. So help this content reach more people by leaving your like, subscribing to the channel, and activating the bell so you don't miss any of the next parts of this story. The following days were a mixture of routine and anguish. Karen continued to work at the hospital, caring for patients, measuring blood pressure, listening to reports of physical pain, while a silent pain grew inside her whenever she thought of Emily at school. In the morning, she prepared coffee, put her daughter's lunchbox in her backpack, checked that her coat was buttoned. On the outside, everything looked the same as the other families. Inside, every gesture was loaded with concern. She began to pay attention to details that she might not have noticed before. Emily's eyes, for example, looked more tired. The discreet dark circles that had appeared under the girl's eyes did not match her age, nor with the days that should be light. On a specific afternoon, before one of the rehearsals, Emily took longer than usual to leave the room. Karen knocked on the door, hearing a slight sniffle on the other side. When the girl opened it, her eyes were a little red, as if she had cried. Asked if everything was okay, Emily replied too quickly that yes, that she was just sleepy. Her mother noticed that. As she spoke, she pressed the hem of her shirt between her fingers, as if trying to hold something inside. At that moment, Karen's instinct almost made her tell her daughter not to go to rehearsal. Almost. But the answer came earlier, automatic, as if it were already recorded. The professor said that today the special rehearsal is important. I can't miss it, otherwise I'll ruin everything. These words weighed like stones on her mother's heart. Screw it up. What kind of man would put this responsibility on the shoulders of a 10-year-old, let alone something that was supposed to be just a fun activity? This question was pounding in Karen's mind all day. In the hospital, while changing dressings, while writing down information in medical records, while pushing a cart with medicines through the corridors, she found herself, mentally, back in the auditorium, trying to imagine what was happening inside. It was as if the school, that place that always represented security, had gained a dark side that she could not fully see. The inner pressure increased with each new small signal. Emily stopped eating everything from the plate at dinner, said she wasn't hungry, that her stomach was strange. She woke up sometimes with cold hands, looking for her mother in her bed during the night, saying that she did not want to be alone. At other times, he seemed normal, laughed at simple jokes, hugged his mother from behind while Karen washed the dishes. This alternation between moments of apparent normality and moments of fear left the mother confused, but also even more attentive. On one of these days, while folding the costume that the school had sent for the play, a simple dress that the children would wear on stage, Karen noticed something that could go unnoticed by any other eye. There were small stains of sweat in the collar and armpit area, stronger than one would expect from a child who had only stayed in a heated auditorium in the middle of winter without great physical effort. She touched the fabric, felt the moisture there, and remembered her daughter's face coming back from rehearsals, slightly pale, with her hair sticking a little to her forehead. The image of Emily curled up in bed, mumbling lines from the play in dreams, came back in full force. That night, when Emily was ready for bed, Karen sat on the edge of the bed and took her daughter's hands between hers. They were small, icy fingers, which trembled slightly, almost imperceptible, but not enough to escape the eyes of a mother who knew every trace of her daughter. This is not just shyness, she thought, feeling her heart tighten. My God, what's going on inside? The urge to cry came strong, but she swallowed it, because she knew that if she showed all the fear there, she could scare her daughter even more. Karen's internal conflict had reached an almost unbearable point. On the one hand, there was an entire school that seemed to fully trust Mr. Harris. There were mothers on the soccer field who called it a gift for the kids. There was Emily herself, who, even though she was afraid, spoke of the teacher as someone who knew what she was doing, and who said that to be a good actress, you had to go to the limit. On the other hand, there was the body of the girl, who didn't know how to lie. Trembling hands, sweat on cold days, stomach aches before the rehearsal, eyes running away from simple questions. There was also Karen's own body, which reacted with tachycardia, with butterflies in her stomach, every time she thought about the door of that auditorium closing. With all of this bubbling up inside her, came a quiet but firm decision. Karen understood that if she just watched from a distance, she might regret it bitterly later. The fear of making mistakes was still there, whispering that she might be exaggerating, but the fear of doing nothing was greater. And, in the background, a phrase was repeated, as if someone were talking in her ear. A mother cannot afford to ignore her own signs. She looked at the clock on the bedside table, saw the hands approaching 2 in the morning, and realized she wouldn't sleep that night. It was lying in the darkness of her room, listening to the distant sound of trains crossing the Maple Grove region, that Karen began to put together, in her mind, what she would do next. He thought about schedules, routes, how to get to school without attracting attention. She thought about parking the car somewhere else, not in front of the auditorium, so she could walk there without being easily seen. He thought about talking to Emily again, but at the same time, he knew that his daughter was already at the limit of what she could say without panicking. All of this was spinning in my head, like scenes from a movie that has yet to end. Nothing in that story was happening by chance. Every sign of Emily's body, every word from the teacher about real fear, every interrupted dream, every belly ache was like a piece of a puzzle that Karen hadn't yet been able to put together completely. And within her, the certainty grew that soon something would break that fragile balance between doubt and truth. What she didn't know yet was that the next few hours, the next few days, would take her to a point of no return, where it would be impossible to pretend that nothing was happening. The next afternoon, the plan that had taken shape in Karen's head during the night finally began to unfold in real life. She left the hospital early, her badge still hot from being passed on the reader, and drove to Lincoln Elementary, feeling that, with each block, her heart was beating louder inside her chest. The streets of Maple Grove, so familiar, looked different that day. The same houses with manicured lawns, the same tall trees swaying in the cold wind, the same school sign with the letters announcing the winter play, a journey through fear. But for Karen, all that had taken on another color. It was as if the whole set hid something that no one wanted to see. She parked the car in the small side parking lot, the one the employees used, not the one in front, where parents used to wait for their children. He did it on purpose. She didn't want to be noticed right away. When he turned off the engine, he spent a few seconds with his hands on the steering wheel, feeling his palms damp. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. He heard, in the distance, the echo of children's laughter coming from the gym. The whistle of a teacher coordinating some game, the hollow sound of a bouncing ball. There was also the discreet smell of cleaning products that always permeated the air in the school corridors. All this, on any other day, would be a sign of normality. In that one, however, it seemed the backdrop of something that could be devastating. Karen got out of the car and walked down the side aisle, where few parents passed. I felt the cold floor under my shoes, the smell of disinfectant mixing with that of a children's snack that still came from the cafeteria. Each step was calculated, and at the same time it seemed to have been taken in the dark. When he got close to the auditorium, he saw that the main door was only ajar. A banner with the name of the piece hung above the entrance, with drawings made by the students. She approached slowly, being careful that the shoes did not make too much noise. Looking through the crack, he could see the illuminated stage, with the main group of children spread out, some holding papers, others rehearsing lines with exaggerated gestures. There in the center of the scene was Mr. Harris, in a dark blazer and light shirt, walking across the front of the stage while giving directions. He spoke loudly for everyone to hear, praised one student, corrected another, asked for more emotion, more surrender, more truth. To any inattentive observer, he seemed just like a teacher committed to his work. Karen, however, could no longer look at him without feeling her stomach turn. She stood there for a few moments, motionless, hidden behind the door, until she saw something that made her chest tighten for good. Mr. Harris called Emily by name, along with 2 other girls, and with a gesture of his hand, asked the 3 of them to leave the front of the stage and go with him behind the black curtain. She saw Emily obey, with small steps, tightening her coat over her chest, even inside the heated auditorium. The other children remained seated, spread out on the chairs in front, while the teacher and the small group slowly disappeared behind the heavy curtain. Karen felt her heart choke in her throat. That wasn't a quick conversation. It wasn't a costume adjustment. It wasn't something he did with everyone at the same time. It was, once again, the special group away from the eyes of others, in the only place in that space where the public's vision could not reach. Without thinking too much, she entered the auditorium, taking light steps down the side aisle, glued to the walls. She looked for a place where she could see better without being seen, and found a pile of cardboard sets leaning against the side of the stage. They were panels painted by the children, with trees, houses, and strange figures representing the landscapes of the play. Karen squeezed between them and the wall, smelling the smell of dried paint and dust, and from there she was able to get a partial view of what was happening on the main stage. The chairs were occupied by children waiting for their turn to rehearse, some whispering, others distracted. The central curtain, heavy and dark, hid what was going on behind. She leaned her body slightly, trying to hear any sound that came from behind that thick fabric. For a few seconds, the noise of the children in front got in the way. But when Mr. Harris ordered everyone to be silent, the murmuring subsided, and something could be heard coming from behind the cloth. A lower voice, a different tone from the one he used on stage. Karen held her breath. He heard the words, "Let's repeat the scene of fear," spoken in a firm voice. Then a command for the girls to close their eyes and feel like there is no one else in the world to help them. Karen's legs were shaky. She moved a little closer to the side curtain, being careful not to knock over the cardboard plates. Her hands were so damp that she had to dry them in her own pants, nervously. The feeling of being about to discover something terrible overwhelmed her. Time seemed to slow down. A second lasted like a minute. She even reached out to hold the end of the curtain and push it away at once, but hesitated, taken by the fear of not only seeing, but also of being seen by the children, the teacher, the principal. "What if I make a scandal for nothing? What if I'm wrong?" flashed through my mind. Then another, stronger phrase took the place of doubt. "What if I'm right?" Her breathing became short. His chest hurt. The feeling was of being inside a movie, in slow motion, in which the moment of revelation was approaching without it being possible to go back. Just as she leaned her body a little further, ready to take the last step, something happened on her back. A hand lightly touched his shoulder, and a familiar but totally out-of-place voice at that moment broke the tense atmosphere like a shattered glass. Karen turned, frightened, with her heart in her mouth, and found the principal of the school, Mrs. Thompson, smiling broadly, without the slightest idea of the whirlwind that was going on inside that mother. The director wore a blue wool sweater, a discreet necklace, and held a clipboard with some papers. The smile was polite, the look gentle. He asked if everything was okay, if Karen needed anything, and, even before any answer, he began to praise Emily's special talent for drama. He said that the girl was one of the most dedicated in the class, that the theatre teacher was impressed, that the rehearsals were making everyone excited for the day of the performance. For a few seconds, Karen found herself torn between the urge to scream and the need to appear civil. Forced to answer, she swallowed the lump in her throat, forced a short smile, and muttered that she had come just to take a quick look at the rehearsal. He tried to keep his voice neutral, but he felt that any longer word could come out like a sob. Meanwhile, the noise coming from behind the curtain seemed to subside, as if the moment she needed to catch was slipping through her fingers, wasted in polite sentences that meant nothing close to the fear that gnawed at her. The conversation with the director lasted seconds, maybe a minute, but for Karen, it seemed to intersperse two worlds. On the one hand, the institutional discourse that everything was fine, that the school was safe, that the teachers were dedicated. On the other, the memory of Emily's trembling hands, the confused dreams, the phrases about really feeling fear. As the principal spoke, Karen's thought repeated in desperate silence, "Please finish soon. I need to see my daughter." When she finally managed to end the conversation, thanking her daughter for her compliments and nodding her head, Karen turned her eyes to the stage. Mr. Harris had already reappeared in the visible part, coming out from behind the curtain with the same smile as always, calling back the rest of the group to continue the rehearsal. Behind him, the three girls appeared, walking in a line. Emily was in the middle. They were all silent. No child cried, none ran, none seemed openly panicked. To someone inattentive, nothing there betrayed any problem. But Karen saw with a trained mother's eye that Emily's posture was even more shrunken. The girl kept her arms glued to her body and stared at the ground with intensity, biting her lower lip as if she were holding the words with her teeth. Frustration took over. She had the feeling that she was just a few steps away from seeing something decisive, and that by a cruel irony she had been interrupted precisely by an authority figure, someone who should be her support. The feeling of isolation increased. The director, who could be an ally, had appeared at the worst time, with compliments that sounded like a stopgap in a wall full of cracks. As she watched the rehearsal resume its rhythm in front of the stage, Karen knew that at that moment she would not be able to get any explanation there, nor face the teacher in front of all the children. Her body was shaking too much, her heart racing too much, her mind too confused. She left the auditorium with almost mechanical steps. He didn't remember exactly how he crossed the corridor, nor which path he took to the exit. The smell of cleaning products seemed stronger, cloying. The white light of the corridors hurt his eyes. When he arrived at the parking lot, he stopped for a few seconds next to the car, holding the keys without being able to fit them into the lock. Only then did he realize that his hands were shaking. Short breaths, tight chest, full head. "I was so close," he repeated silently. "So close." On the way back home, anger began to mix with fear. It was not an explosive rage of screaming, but a silent rage which burned inside. Anger at herself for having hesitated. Anger at the system for not seeing. Anger at that feeling of always being interrupted when I got close to the truth. When he stopped at a traffic light, he looked at his own face reflected in the rearview mirror. She looked older than the week before. There was a new shadow in her eyes, a tiredness that didn't just come from shifts at the hospital. "I can't go on like this," he thought. "I can't be at the mercy of luck to find out what's going on with my daughter." When she finally got home, in a neighborhood of houses with manicured lawns and American flags on the porches, Karen felt like she was walking through the door of a quiet battlefield. The house, which had always represented shelter and rest, was now also the place where the pieces of that story were scattered without her being able to assemble everything. He left his bag on the couch, took off his coat, and went straight to Emily's room. The girl had not yet arrived from school, because that day she would stay late. This gave the mother precious time, a space to act without her daughter's presence. Emily's room was a clear reflection of her childhood. Posters of drawings, colored pencils scattered on the desk, a mural with photos of the school, friends smiling at intermission, family drawings made with simple strokes. In the corner, backpack resting next to the closet, sneakers left anyway, a coat slumped on the chair. Karen entered there carefully, as if she were treading on sacred ground, and closed the door behind her. For a few seconds he looked around, took a deep breath, and made a firm decision. He needed proof, anything that would confirm what his instinct had been screaming. He approached the backpack and opened it gently. He began to rummage through the notebooks, the folders, the pencil case. He found the play's notebook, the one in which Emily wrote down lines, scene markings, small observations. Her daughter's letters were round, childish, with some words cut in the middle, others underlined. Karen flipped through page by page, her heart racing, until something different caught her eye. Among common lines in the play, there were loose phrases written in pencil, as if they had been written down quickly, in moments of emotion. "To really feel the fear," said one of them. "Don't tell anyone about today's exercise," said another, underlined twice. These sentences fell on Karen like stones. She ran her finger over the word "nobody," as if to erase it by touch. Just below, on another page, there was a drawing. It was the auditorium stage, made with simple lines, with several chairs represented by small rectangles. In front, the side curtains, and far behind, a dark area filled with stronger pencil, as if it were shadow. Within this shadow, a larger figure without a defined face, and three smaller figures, shrunken. The pencil seemed almost to tear the paper where the shadow was. The thought took shape, of course, as if a voice spoke loudly inside Karen's head. A teacher doesn't tell a child to promise secrecy like that. That's wrong. It was no longer just a gut feeling. There were, concrete marks that Emily was being led to live something that did not fit her age, that crossed the fine line between artistic exercise and emotional invasion. She felt a mixture of disgust and indignation rising through her chest. He closed the notebook slowly, his hands trembling, and put it back in its place just as he had found it. Then he went to the desk and opened the drawer. Inside, in addition to erasers and sharpeners, there were some folded tickets. They were messages that the school sent, announcements about schedules, warnings about costumes. Among them, a small, crumpled paper, which did not look official. When he opened it, he saw a quick note in childish handwriting. Not to mention the special training, he said that mothers can disturb the scene. Karen felt her stomach turn. It was as if he had been punched hard. His hands began to sweat. His vision was slightly blurred for a few seconds. She closed her eyes, trying to control herself. The image of Emily lying in bed, shaking, repeating words of fear, came back with even greater force. There is no turning back now, he thought. From the moment he had read those sentences, seen that drawing, there was no more room to deceive himself into thinking that everything was just an exaggeration. You couldn't cover the sun with a sieve. You couldn't sweep the dirt under the carpet. It was as if a thread had been pulled, and now the whole hidden plot began to unravel. He went to the living room, sat on the sofa, and remained silent for a few minutes, listening only to the sound of the wall clock marking every second. Each ticking seemed to say, "Act, act, act." The whole body ached, as if every muscle was on alert. The breathing was heavy. The chest rose and fell with difficulty. Rhetorical questions arose in series. Why did it take me so long to look at the notebook? Why doesn't the school see this? How many other children are going through the same thing? The desire to call someone came and went, but was soon swallowed up by the certainty that few people would understand at first. The same mothers who looked at her as exaggerated on the soccer field would possibly repeat the same role, asking for calm, saying that it's not quite like that. That night, when Emily came home from school, the house was quieter than usual. Karen did her best to act naturally, asked about the day, the rehearsal, offered a snack, but her heart beat differently. She watched her daughter's every gesture as if it were a clue. He saw that the girl avoided talking about the special training, even when she mentioned the play. He saw that when he heard Mr. Harris's name, he bit his lip, as in the drawing of the notebook. The mother felt a mixture of tenderness and despair as she noticed how her daughter tried to protect the teacher and, at the same time, protect herself from the truth that she could not put into words. It was after dinner, with the dishes already in the sink, that Karen got the courage to start a different conversation. They went upstairs to the bedroom, and she asked Emily to put on her pajamas and lie down. He turned off the main light, leaving only the lamp on, and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress sink slightly under his weight. The heater in the house was on, keeping the environment cozy, but the mother felt a cold that did not come from outside. It was an internal cold of expectation and fear. In a firm but sweet voice, she asked what was really going on in the fear rehearsals with Mr. Harris. He didn't ask lightly as before. It was not a loose question in the midst of others. It was a central question, loaded with intention. Emily, who until then had fiddled with her fingers, stopped moving. Silence settled in the room for a few seconds that seemed eternal. The girl pulled the blanket up to her chin, as if she wanted to hide under it, and her body began to tremble slightly. first almost invisible, then stronger. Karen felt her heart sink when she saw her daughter like this, but she knew she couldn't turn back. He insisted calmly, saying that he needed to understand, that it was not just curiosity, it was care. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears, and began to speak, her voice low, almost a whisper. He said that in special rehearsals, Mr. Harris took only 3 girls behind the curtain, away from the rest of the group. He said that he turned off almost all the lights, leaving only a dim lamp on in the corner, enough to see shadows moving on the wooden floor. He also said that he asked them to stand very close to each other, sometimes even in a circle, and that he himself would get too close, almost touching. He spoke softly in their ears that for the audience to believe the scene, they had to really be afraid, not just pretend. He ordered them to repeat the speech of terror several times in the loudest, most desperate voice, and that they could not stop until he felt that it was true. Emily admitted that she sometimes cried for real, but he used it as part of the exercise, saying he was perfect when he saw tears. Every sentence of the daughter was like a slow stab at Karen. She felt the blood running cold in her veins. His hands, resting on the mattress, began to sweat. She asked if he touched them. Emily hesitated, her eyes fleeing. She said that he put his hand on his shoulders, brought his face too close, sometimes held his arms when they tried to move away a little, saying that it broke the emotion of the scene. He said that one day he had asked them to imagine being locked in a dark place, with no one to help, no mother, no father, no friend, just a voice telling them what they had to do. It was in this part that Karen felt a wave of nausea, as if she had swallowed something too bitter. The idea of someone asking a 10-year-old child to imagine a world without his mother, without protection, left her stunned. He asked, his voice already breaking, why Emily had never told her that before. The girl, crying, pulled the blanket higher up and confessed that Mr. Harris said that mothers would not understand the artistic process, that if they knew everything they would spoil the work and hinder the growth of the girls as actresses. He also said that that secret made them special, that they were the chosen ones to carry the weight of the most important scene of the play. The impact of these words was almost physical on Karen. It was as if finally the whole picture gained focus. He was not just a demanding teacher, it wasn't just more intense theatre. It was someone using the fragility of children, the desire to please, the dream of participating in something big, to impose situations of real fear and worse, to isolate them from the people who could most protect them. The imposed secrecy was what hurt the most. Emily, still sobbing, said that whenever she thought about telling, she remembered what he said about screwing up and felt guilty just imagining letting him down. Karen hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her small body tremble against hers. Inside, he felt a devastating mixture of guilt, fear, and hatred. Guilt for not having realized it before, for having relied too much on the image of a dedicated man built by the school. Fear of what could have happened if everything had gone even further. Hatred of that teacher who had placed himself between mother and daughter, creating an abyss made of secrets and manipulation. In the midst of these feelings, a certainty grew like fire. It could not continue, not even for another day. Later, after Emily, exhausted from crying, finally fell asleep, hugging the pillow, Karen went downstairs to the living room and sat on the couch, alone. The wall clock marked each minute with a ticking that seemed even louder than usual. The television remained off. The lights in the house were few, creating shadows that stretched out into the corners. She stayed there, motionless for a time that she would not know how to measure, the mind spinning, the heart beating, the hands restless. If the school doesn't want to see it, if the other mothers don't want to hear it, I'm going to need to be living proof of what's going on, she thought, with an almost painful clarity. It was at that moment that an idea began to take shape. She couldn't just count on her own word against that of a dear teacher. He needed something that spoke for itself, something that no one could ignore. She got up, went to a drawer in the living room furniture, and began to look for a small tape recorder that her ex-husband used years ago in work meetings. After a few minutes of rummaging through old cables and batteries, he found the device. It was small, silver, with a red record button. He tested the sound, spoke a few words near the microphone, pressed the play button, and heard his own voice, clean and clear. The idea was simple, and at the same time, huge. At the next rehearsal, she would put the tape recorder in Emily's backpack, turned on, hidden between the notebooks and the costume. The device would record everything that happened behind the curtain, the words, the tone of voice, Mr. Harris's commands, the girls' reactions. With this, she could prove, without depending on versions, that children were being forced to live a fear that should not be part of a school exercise. She also thought that she needed to be physically in place, ready to rush in if she heard anything that indicated immediate danger. He would no longer be content to see through the crack in the door. Next time would be different. With the tape recorder in hand, Karen went back upstairs to Emily's room. She stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching her daughter sleep. Her face was still a little swollen from crying, but now she seemed at peace, at least for that night. The girl hugged the pillow as if it were a shield. The room, with its drawings and toys, seemed even more fragile in the eyes of the mother. It was as if that innocent environment was being invaded by something that had no place there. Karen felt the tears finally escape, silent, running down her face uncontrollably. But along with them also came a new courage, made up of love and revolt. She folded the costume carefully, smoothing the fabric as if she could, with that, protect her daughter from any damage. Then he placed the tape recorder on his desk, in a place where he would remember to pick it up in the morning. I knew the night would be long, and it was. She went back to the room, sat down again, and the clock became almost a character marking the time that did not pass. 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Karen barely blinked. He went over in thought every sign he had ignored, every sentence of Emily's, every gesture of Mr. Harris. But at the same time, he clung to the fact that he finally had a concrete plan. "I'm not going to let him continue," he repeated mentally. "Not with my daughter, not with any other. If you are here, it is because this story really deserves to be heard until the end." What follows will show the exact moment when this mother stopped just suspecting and started facing the truth head-on. Don't leave this video until you find out what she heard and saw when she decided to act for good. The day scheduled for the next rehearsal dawned with a grey sky over Maple Grove. The wind cut a little harder, waving the flags on the balconies and making the dry leaves run down the street as small warnings that something important was about to happen. Karen woke up before the alarm clock went off. He hadn't really slept. He spent the night between light naps and sudden awakenings, always with the same image in his head. Emily behind the curtain under a dim light, repeating words of fear, while an adult figure said that it was necessary. In the kitchen, he prepared coffee with automatic hands, toast, juice, a little fruit. The usual smell of school morning took over the house. Emily walked down the stairs with slow steps, her eyes still scarred from the crying of the night before, but trying to act as if everything was normal. Karen watched her daughter with almost painful care. She saw that the girl avoided talking about the rehearsal, but when the subject came up, she said that she had no choice because the teacher had said that the special group could not be absent from any session. Before leaving the house, while Emily was picking up her backpack, Karen discreetly held the tape recorder and, with a quick gesture, placed it inside the inside pocket, between the playbook's notebook and the case. He pressed the red button, making sure the indicator light came on. Her heart raced at that moment. It was like crossing a line. Emily, without knowing it, would carry with her the key that could open the eyes of many people. For a moment, Karen wondered if it was okay to do that without telling her daughter, but she soon thought that if she spoke, she risked further increasing the emotional burden on the girl. He then decided that the best way to protect Emily that day was to let her carry out her routine without another worry. On the way to school, the conversation in the car was short. Emily looked out the window, watching with her eyes the trees that passed by, the houses, the people walking with thick coats on the sidewalks. Karen took advantage of a moment when the light closed to look directly at her daughter. He said, in a calm voice, that he would be thinking about her all the time that day. He added that if at any time he felt bad, he should know that he didn't have to please anyone, that he could leave the rehearsal, go to the hallway, call, do anything. "You'll never mess anything up by being honest with me," she said, choosing her words carefully. Emily nodded slowly without answering, but those words seemed to sink deep into her. As she dropped her daughter off at the entrance to the school, Karen waited until she saw her walk through the main door and disappear into the hallway. Only then did he return to the car. Instead of going straight to work, which on that day would be on a reduced shift, she drove to a side street near the school where few cars passed. He stopped there, with a partial view of the area where the auditorium was, and spent a few minutes just observing the facade of Lincoln Elementary. The sign, the bricks, the windows, everything seemed so ordinary, but she knew that behind that facade there was a room where the light was too dim for a mother's taste. Throughout the day, Karen tried to keep the hours in the hospital, but her thoughts wouldn't leave the school. "I looked at the clock every 10 minutes, as if suddenly the rehearsal time was going to arrive earlier than expected. When the time finally came, she asked to leave, explained the situation to a co-worker who took over the rest of the shift. He returned to the car with quick steps and drove to the same side street as before. He parked, turned off the engine, and took a few moments to take a deep breath, trying to calm his heart that seemed to want to jump out of his chest. He entered the school through the side door, as he had planned. The hallways were emptier, with only a few students passing by, perhaps returning from extracurricular activities or going to drink water. The distant sound of balls bouncing in the gym and voices echoing came from afar, but as she approached the auditorium, the atmosphere became quieter. The smell of disinfectant and floor wax was stronger there. Every step toward the auditorium door sounded loud to Karen's ears, though in truth the sound was minimal. As he approached the entrance, he heard Mr. Harris's voice coming from within. He guided the main group on stage, asking them to repeat a scene with more intensity, talking about posture, voice projection, emotion. The door was ajar again, and she once again stepped in sideways, leaning against the wall, hiding partially behind the rows of empty chairs at the back. He watched for a few minutes and saw that the pace was similar to before. Children occupying the stage, others sitting, the teacher walking, talking, gesticulating, until the moment came that she feared and, at the same time, waited. He called Emily by name, along with two other girls, and spoke in a lower tone about repeating the scene stronger. He asked the rest of the group to do a memorization exercise in front, while he would work a little more closely with the trio. Karen felt a shiver run down her spine. He saw the three girls approach him, heard the heavy curtain being pulled partially, leaving a minimal opening. The stage lights remained on, but it was possible to see that behind the curtain the scenery was darker. She snuck once more from the side, now hiding between a light stand and some stacked chairs. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her ears. He stood a few steps from the curtain. He could hear the suppressed breath of some children on the stage, the whispering of others. But most of all, he heard Mr. Harris's voice, now lower, almost whispered. He told the girls to come closer, to close their eyes, to imagine being alone in a place with no way out. He said that his mother was not there, that no one would hear them, that only his voice would lead the scene. At that moment, Karen felt that the limit had been crossed for good. She was ready to tear the curtain off when a different sound cut through the air. A restrained, trapped, but unmistakable cry. It was Emily's voice, which she would recognize anywhere. A muffled sob, an attempt to hold back the tears that escaped at the same time. That didn't seem like acting at all. It was pain. It was fear. Karen's body responded before her mind interfered. His legs, which until then had trembled, firmed up, His arms, which were glued to his body, moved quickly. She let go of the hiding place, took long strides towards the stage, and with a strength she didn't even know she had, pushed the curtain aside with both hands, making the heavy fabric slide along the tracks with a dry sound. The scene she found there, in seconds, was forever etched in her memory, and would be the image she would later tell to the entire Maple Grove community. But the full outcome of that moment is something that is yet to be revealed. Before we continue, help bring real and necessary stories to those who really care. If you want to be part of this mission and not miss what will happen to Karen, Emily, and this entire school after this moment, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. What comes next will stir your heart even more. That same afternoon, after all the confusion in the auditorium, Karen found herself sitting in a hard chair in the boardroom, her hands still shaking, smelling the strong smell of reheated coffee mixed with the perfume of cleaning product. The room was small, with a light wood desk, the principal's diplomas hanging on the wall, and a picture with the school district's logo. Emily was next to her, curled up in her chair, clutching a tissue between her fingers. The headmistress, Mrs. Thompson, paced back and forth, clearly shaken, while two school officials tried to understand exactly what had happened. Karen, however, had no more doubts. He took Emily's backpack off the floor, opened it with a determined movement, and picked up the small tape recorder he had hidden there earlier. That simple object, the size of the palm of his hand, seemed to weigh a ton. He placed the device on the table, pressed the button, and said in a firm voice that everyone needed to hear what was recorded. The principal stopped moving, approached slowly, and with a wave, asked everyone in the room for silence. For the first few seconds, only the muffled sound of footsteps was heard, the echo of the voices of the children in the auditorium. Afterwards, the recording showed the moment when Mr. Harris asked the girls to move away from the main group and go behind the curtain. His voice came out clear, low, but loaded with an insistence that made any adult's stomach turn. He told the three of them to stand in a circle, to close their eyes, and then asked them to forget that there was someone out there. She said that they needed to feel that they were alone in the world, that the fear would only be true when they really cried. The recording continued, revealing the trembling voices of the girls, increasingly fragile. One of them, who wasn't Emily, let out a sob. Another said she didn't want to repeat it anymore. And then, in a clear way, came Mr. Harris's answer, in a low and firm tone, saying that if they did not surrender the fear, they could lose the paper and spoil everyone's effort. In some excerpts, he asked not to tell anything about it at home, stating that mothers would not understand the artistic process and that some things about the theatre needed to be kept secret. When the recording reached the point where Emily was crying and saying she couldn't take it anymore, the silence in the director's office became heavy, almost suffocating. Karen kept her eyes fixed on the director. There was no more room for excuses or pretty explanations. The evidence was there, in the sound of those childish voices forced to go through a despair that did not belong to them. Mrs. Thompson put her hand to her mouth in shock and sat down slowly in the chair, as if her own body had lost its strength. He said that he had known the professor for years, that he had never imagined anything like it. But the audio left no room for doubt. It was not interpretation, it was not modern artistic method. It was a severe emotional exposure of children who trusted an adult who was supposed to protect them. While they were still listening, someone knocked on the door, and shortly after, two other children who had witnessed similar rehearsals were called into the room. At first, they were full of fear. They looked at the ground, fiddled with the laces of their coats, avoided talking. But when Karen looked at them with a firm and welcoming countenance, and when Emily shook her mother's hand, as if to say wordlessly, "It's true," something changed. One of the girls took a deep breath and said that she also felt bad in the so-called fear rehearsals. He said he didn't like it when the teacher turned off almost all the lights, got too close and spoke in their ears, whispering that no one could know exactly what they were doing there, because the mothers would get in and get in the way of his work. Another child confirmed that he sometimes left rehearsals with a stomachache and a desire to cry, but he didn't say anything at home because Mr. Harris had told them not to comment, saying that parents get in the way when they don't understand art. With each sentence, Karen felt her heart tighten and at the same time a flame of indignation grow. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about all those children who had been put in a situation of fear in the name of a supposed artistic improvement. The principal, already pale, picked up the phone and called the school district's central office. He spoke in a trembling voice, reporting what he had heard on the tape recorder and what the children were telling. He then made an immediate decision. He suspended Mr. Harris from all activities, called him asking him not to return to school until further notice, and announced that the district would open a formal investigation into abusive conduct and undue emotional exposure of students. In parallel, an employee was tasked with calling the local police to file a report and receive guidance on next steps. In the following hours, the news spread silently, first through the school corridors, then through the message groups of the mothers in the neighborhood. Some were hard to believe. Others, when listening to a few excerpts of the audio, felt the ground disappear under their feet. The image of the charismatic professor began to crack. Comments that were once compliments have become questions. Weren't those exercises exaggerated? My daughter had already said she didn't like it when he turned off the lights. I thought it was just shyness. The phrases were repeated, as if everyone was reviewing old memories in the light of a truth they did not want to see before. For Karen, the moment she saw two police officers enter the school, talk to the principal and listen, with headphones, to the contents of the recorder was strange and at the same time liberating. On the one hand, it was painful to see the situation get to that point. No one dreams of seeing their daughter's school becoming the scene of investigation. On the other hand, there was a sense of justice being born there in a concrete way. It was no longer just the word of an overly worried mother versus that of a respected teacher. They were proofs, they were reports from several children. It was the structure of the school moving, finally, towards the protection of the little ones who had always trusted adults. In the days that followed, the school district opened a thorough investigation. Mr. Harris was officially removed from his duties, forbidden to enter Lincoln Elementary or any other school in the district until everything was ascertained. The parents received communications by email and on paper, informing them that the winter play was suspended indefinitely and that all activities related to the theater would be reviewed. District attorneys, social workers and psychologists were called to attend the meetings. The professor's name, which had previously been associated with internal awards and accolades, now came up in whispered conversations, full of indignation. The police took statements from Karen, Emily, other children, and a few more parents. At no time did the children report direct physical contact of sexual abuse, and this was an important relief for all families. But it became clear that there was a serious line of emotional abuse. Children pushed to the edge of fear, exposed to situations of extreme psychological pressure without informed consent from their parents and under subtle threats of loss of role and shame in front of the class. For many mothers, this was reason enough to feel their souls torn. No one wants to see a daughter crying in fear because an adult who was supposed to protect her decided to play with feelings that she still doesn't even know how to name properly. With each meeting, with each step of the investigation, Karen felt a stronger certainty. If she hadn't trusted that tightness in her chest, none of it would have come to light any time soon. Perhaps that's why, when some mothers began to approach her in the school parking lot in the following days, many came with tears in their eyes, apologizing. They said that when she commented on the strange rehearsals, they thought it was exaggeration, paranoia, drama. Now they understood that it wasn't. More than one woman held Karen's hand and said, "You weren't crazy, you were right, and it saved our daughters too." This recognition did not erase the pain, nor the fear that Emily had felt. But it brought a deep meaning to Karen's attitude. It was as if, finally, someone had put out loud what so many mothers feel and cannot always explain, that there is an instinct, an internal signal, that it is not freshness, it is not hysteria, it is not drama. It's a mother's heart trying to warn you that something is wrong, even when everything on the outside seems normal. To those listening to the story from the outside, it could seem just about a teacher and a play. For Karen, and for so many like her, it was about a mother's right to be taken seriously when she says, "There's something here that doesn't feel right." Mr. Harris's downfall was not just that of a man. It was the fall of a blind trust in titles, accolades, and appearances. When the community finally saw clearly what he was doing behind the scenes, a lot needed to be reviewed. Principals from other schools in the district called meetings to discuss protocols. They wondered how many times, in the name of a beautiful project, they had ignored small complaints from children and parents. Some mothers, who had previously kept quiet for fear of looking boring, began to talk more, to ask questions, to want to know exactly how activities were conducted in which their children were alone with adults. In the midst of this transformation, there was a message that was formed, simple and at the same time powerful. A mother is not exaggerated when she feels that something is not right with her child. She is being a guardian. Karen and Emily's story has come to be told by other women as an example that even when everyone says it's just in your head, it's worth investigating, asking, insisting. Because, in the balance between being seen as dramatic or protecting a child from a dangerous situation, there should be no question about which side to choose. In the days following the teacher's removal, Emily began going to a child therapist appointed by the school district itself, at a clinic in the city specializing in trauma and anxiety in children. In the first sessions, the girl hardly spoke. He sat in a small, colorful armchair, holding a toy in his hands, looking at the floor. When the calm and patient therapist asked her to talk about the stage, the auditorium, the lights off, Emily shrugged her shoulders and squinted as if she wanted to push away images that still came with too much force. Over time, the professional introduced other forms of expression: drawings, Play-Doh, stories invented with dolls. Gradually, Emily began to design stages. In the beginning, there were dark stages, heavy curtains, small figures of girls in the corner, surrounded by shadows. Then, with the support of the therapist and Karen's constant presence in the waiting rooms, the drawings began to change. Lights came on, chairs full of people smiling, scenes in which she was on stage, but the teacher was distant, sitting among the adults, unable to tell her to do anything that scared her. Karen also carried her own wounds. Some nights, she still woke up scared, mentally hearing the sound of her daughters crying behind the curtain. There was a guilt that appeared in the form of questions after question. Why didn't I notice it before? Why did I want so much to believe that everything was fine? But every time those questions started to get too heavy, she remembered the moment she tore the curtain open with her hands, walked into the dark space behind the stage, and pulled Emily into her arms, saying with all the strength she had that none of this would happen again. I also remembered the tape recorder, the other children gaining the courage to speak, the police entering the school. And, slowly, guilt gave way to a sense of fulfilled responsibility. The school, in turn, had no choice but to change. In meetings with parents, the board presented a new set of rules for any extracurricular activity. From that episode on, all the doors of rooms used for rehearsals, workshops, or special groups should remain open. No teacher could be alone with a small group of children, especially in dimly lit environments. without the presence of at least one assistant or other authorized adult. Parents were invited to visit the spaces used in the activities, to ask questions, to visit rehearsals whenever they wanted. The discourse was clear, total transparency to recover the trust that had been shaken. It was in this climate of change that other mothers began to seek out Karen, not only to apologize, but to ask for something more: guidance. They wanted to know how she had perceived the signs, how she had found the courage to face the school, the teacher, her own doubt. Some told stories of old annoyances they had ignored, of strange comments from their children that they didn't pay as much attention to, for fear of being seen as exaggerated. Together, in conversations that began in parking lots and then moved onto coffee tables and community rooms, they formed a kind of support group. This group started small, with half a dozen women, all with children at Lincoln Elementary. But, over time, others joined, mothers from neighboring schools, grandmothers who took care of their grandchildren, even some parents who were touched by the story. They would gather, sometimes in the city's public library room, sometimes in the hall of a community center, to talk about warning signs, to exchange experiences, to learn from mental health professionals who had come to be invited by themselves. At each meeting, they repeated a phrase that ended up becoming almost a motto: "There is no exaggeration when it comes to the safety of a child." Meanwhile, Mr. Harris's situation was following the course expected for cases of this nature. The school district's investigation, in addition to the material collected by the police, showed a clear pattern of conduct: repeated episodes of undue emotional exposure of children, use of real fear as a tool, manipulation with phrases about secrecy, and threat of loss of paper to ensure silence. He was not arrested for serious physical crimes, because thanks to Karen's intervention, the situation was stopped in time. But he ended up being formally accused of improper conduct with minors, lost his position in the district, had his teacher certificate questioned, and at the end of the administrative process was prohibited from working with children in any public school in the region. His reputation, once so carefully constructed, fell apart like wet paper. Families who had once seen him as someone trustworthy began to avoid him on the streets. In time, he decided to leave the city, unable to bear the weight of the stairs and his own conscience. For the community, this did not erase what had happened, but it did bring a certain relief. The man who once hid behind the word art to justify his fear of children would now no longer have access to other stages full of defenseless girls and boys. 1, 2, 3 years later, Karen and Emily's story still echoed in Maple Grove, but in a different way. It was no longer just the memory of a fear. It was the constant reminder that a mother, alone, can change the course of a lot when she decides not to be silent. Emily, now older, was still in therapy, but she was now able to talk about the episode with more distance, like someone who went through a storm and today can describe the rain without drowning. The stage, which for some time became a symbol of dread, gradually became just a place like any other, a space that she could one day occupy again, if she wanted, but in different, safer conditions. Karen, in turn, became, almost inevitably, a silent reference among families, not because she wanted to be a heroine, but because she was an ordinary woman who did what many believe they would do, but which, in practice, they are not always able to do. She did not get a plaque, did not have her name in important newspapers. What she won were tight hugs, looks of gratitude, and above all, the intimate feeling of having put her daughter safe in time. At every meeting of the support group, in every conversation with a younger mother, she repeated calmly, "If something about your son or daughter really bothers you, don't ignore it. You're not crazy. Your heart is trying to warn you." Karen never forgot the sound of her daughter's crying behind that dark curtain in the Lincoln Elementary auditorium. That moment became an invisible line in their lives. There was the before and the after of the day she decided to believe, without excuses, in her own mother's heart. The Maple Grove case ran fast through the halls of the school district. Principals of other schools called meetings, revised rules, looked differently at any activity in which an adult was alone with children, especially in closed rooms with lights off. What seemed to be just a story from a small school, from a little-known city, ended up serving as a warning to places far beyond. Emily, at the age of 10, began a slow path of healing. In the first therapy sessions, she could barely speak from the stage. The smell of the curtain cloth, Mr. Harris's low voice whispering in her ear that no one from the outside would understand the process. Each attempt to speak was accompanied by a tightness in her chest, tears that insisted on falling even when she didn't want to. Over time, and with Karen's firm presence by her side, she began to design the stage with lights on, chairs full of people, and a distant teacher sitting in the audience, unable to command anything. These new drawings were a sign that, little by little, fear was losing space to a sense of reconstructed security. Karen also needed time to forgive herself. Many nights, looking out the kitchen window at the quiet street, with the typical American houses lined up and the flag waving in the neighbor's garden, she thought, "Why didn't I see it before? Why did I trust his smile so much?" These questions came back like waves, especially when she remembered the days when she ignored stomachaches, disturbing dreams, cold hands. But then he remembered the moment when he tore the curtain, hugged his daughter trembling, and said firmly, looking into her eyes, "It's over, my love. No one else will make you afraid like that." At that moment, the maternal instinct spoke louder than any praise from the school, than any fame as a dedicated teacher. And that's what, in the end, saved Emily. The community, which once made her feel exaggerated, began to see her as an example of courage. Other mothers told stories of small nuisances they had swallowed, of sleepless nights they had hidden, even from themselves, ashamed of seeming too dramatic. With the group they created, they began to repeat a simple phrase in meetings at the city library. "There is no exaggeration when it comes to the safety of a child." Or this seemingly obvious phrase began to take on a different weight when said by women who knew firsthand what it was like to doubt themselves and then discover that they were right. Mr. Harris faced investigation by the district, was removed and then banned from working with children in any public school in the area. Karen's recording, added to the accounts of other children, proved that he used real fear as a tool, completely ignoring the emotional limits of young girls who trusted him. He lost his position, the respect of the neighborhood, and had to leave the city carrying the mark of what he did. It was not revenge, but a natural consequence of wrong choices made by an adult who forgot that, before any project, there are children of flesh, blood, and feeling. For Karen and Emily, life was never exactly the same again, but it became more honest, more attentive, stronger. They continued to live in Maple Grove, attending the same school, but now with the certainty that no beautiful title and no polite smile are worth more than a mother who chooses to listen to the tightness in her chest and act. The neighborhood continued with its green lawns, its flags on the porches, its neighbors who greet each other when they pick up the newspaper. But inside that particular house, there was a silent new rule. Any strange signal coming from Emily would be heard for real, without minimization, without excuses. For every woman who hears this story, there is a simple but powerful reminder. If something about your daughter or granddaughter seems strange to you, don't be silent, don't be ashamed, don't wait. A vague comment about not wanting to go to a place, a look that escapes when someone's name is mentioned, a stomachache that always appears in the same situation may be just a coincidence. It's true. But they can also be the first call of a small heart asking for protection. And between running the risk of erring on the side of being careful or regretting not having acted, the safest path will always be courageous. This story is not about turning mothers into suspicious investigators of everything, but about remembering that, in a world where many people pretend that everything is fine, the instinct of those who truly love is still one of the most reliable signs that exist. If, when listening to Karen and Emily's story, some old memory stirred inside you, some situation from the past gained a new light, or if you simply felt like hugging the one you love harder, then this narrative has already fulfilled an important part of its role. Don't leave now. Take the next step in this journey by watching the next video on our channel, which will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to discover stories that touch the heart, that show the strength of mothers, grandmothers, and entire families when they decide to protect those who matter most. A big hug, and see you in the next exciting story.